And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. The value of live fire training is difficult to calculate because it's impossible to put a value on human life. Saving lives and avoiding injury are the reasons fire departments train. There is simply no substitute for live firefighting experience under safe, controlled conditions. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1991.
Spooky.
That's how many firefighters would describe the feeling of entering a burning house. Preparation, physical and mental, are the most important things for a firefighter. That's why practice is so essential. The best practice is the real thing, but because that's not always possible, fire departments often do a simulation. And sometimes they let interested reporters come along for the ride.
Yeah, because we're going to stick it on.
Massive fires don't come along very often, which isn't a bad thing. But fighting a real fire is immeasurably better practice than reading about it in a textbook. Every now and again, an empty house comes up for grabs, and the fire department always finds a good use for it.
When houses become available for demolition, our city building department is alerting my office to the fact that there may be a property that we could drill in and eventually burn. Unfortunately, because of the proximity of other neighbors, it becomes impossible in many cases, so they're few and far between.
For the newcomer, the prospect of fighting a fire seems pretty exciting, but it would also have to be fairly stressful. The average person goes into work to sit at a desk or meet a few customers, but a firefighter goes into work to protect members of the community and possibly put his or her life on the line. It's not a career choice suited for just anyone.
Some people are cut out for it and some people aren't, I guess. It's just like myself, I couldn't see myself being a school teacher for the rest of my life, and I don't know, in some ways it's an up, in some ways it's a down, and you just have to learn to deal with it.
But any member of a fire department will agree, proper training significantly reduces the anxieties that lie ahead every time the fire alarm rings.
As long as you feel confident in your training, and training is the most important thing, you know, that it's a good feeling to know that you can help people that aren't trained to help themselves, and if you have the right equipment and the right training, you know, it makes your job a lot easier.
Practice drills like this one reinforce the basic techniques, but they aren't just for the rookies in the department who may never have experienced a large fire.
I think I'm an example of someone who is just itching to get in. It's been a while, and I think in order to maintain my skills and to maintain my awareness and appreciation for firefighting skills and risks, it's important that I get in as well. So to answer that question, from the rookie right through to the senior officer of the department, there's merit in going through this type of drill.
The night of the simulation, fire was set to the house 3 times. Each time it was set ablaze, it was allowed to spread a little bit farther and consume a little more of the structure. And each time, different firefighters handled the situation. For some, it was the first time fighting such a large blaze.
I've never been into a house that has been totally engulfed, but I've been into a couple of smaller fires.
And what was this one like?
Oh, it was good. It was the hottest one I've ever been in, and you can really feel it like you felt earlier. You really feel that heat from the outside coming in. But if you were in there with nothing, you'd feel it a lot more, that's for sure.
For the rookie in particular, there's one thing that is always reinforced.
Safety, 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 safety. Ultimately, I'm charged with the responsibility of ensuring everyone's well-being. The individual's safety is paramount in my mind. The last thing I want to see happen is a member of this department injured. And as a result, I think that we must stress and drill home to them to use all of the firefighting turnout apparel that's designed to protect you, to ensure that when you enter a burning building that you're equipped with a safety line, the appropriate hoses, and that they're charged so that you have a defense mechanism.
Every fire is unique and can never be determined before arrival. But once on the scene, the same basic procedure is usually followed to combat the situation.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Most home fires occur when an open flame or a heat source is left unsupervised. The most common causes overall include leaving your hot stove or burning candles unattended. In as little as 30 seconds, a small flame can grow into a dangerous fire. Let us return to the archives with Terrace Fire Chief Bob Beckett.
Although the circumstances will dictate the type of fire, I'd like to say that the approach is fairly standard, that there are evolutions that must be applied: search and rescue, ventilation of the hot air and gases, extinguishment, salvage, overhaul, mop up, and then return to station.
When dealing with a fire, there's one thing for certain: nobody ever goes in or out alone. There's perhaps no other occupation that depends on partnership quite like firefighting does.
Well, as long as you have reassurance in your partner, you know, you're pretty well protected and you have air for, you know, as long as half an hour at sometimes. And the most important part is making sure that your partner is there with you and he's not going to get spooked. And if he does, you know, you leave as a team and you go in as a team, as you don't leave each other. That's the most important thing.
As soon as you start getting too worried and that, you got to go out, you know, because you're not, I mean, you can't go into a place like that not being scared. But if you get too scared or whatever, you have to go out, you know, I mean, and it happens sometimes. You got to go.
It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, you know.
And you make sure you leave with two people. That's the main thing.
Yeah. Never by yourself.
The firefighters who first enter the house have probably the scariest job because usually the building is pitch black. All they can do is feel around in front of them for anyone who might still be in the house and look for the orange glow or the hot spots. Once found, the water is immediately applied.
As soon as you find it, hit it, knock it down, maybe 15, 20 seconds and back off and see what happens. Let the steam do its work and then go at it again.
Okay, so at what part of the fire do you hit?
The base, at the base, yeah.
And do you just keep the steady flow at the base?
Usually with a wide fog or a fog nozzle on, and just twirl it around and make lots of steam.
Okay, and what are you waiting for to happen after 15 to 20 seconds?
That's when there's probably enough steam in the room that you just let it do its work, absorb all the heat, and then wait and see until it flashes up again and do it again.
It's hard to describe the feeling of being in a room that's on fire. It's not the uncomfortable heat of a hot summer's day. It's more of a suffocating heat that you can feel through your turnout gear. A heat that would scald you instantly once the water's applied and the steam starts to rise. At one point, I actually put my hands to my ears because they were so hot, and I thought by chance I'd forgotten to cover them. Of course, I couldn't feel them through my gloves and all the layers swathed around my head, but it seeps through to your bones the same way the cold does on a wet February day. I guess if you were in the midst of fire often enough, you'd soon find the words to describe it. But to the newcomer, it's very exciting and very real, even though you know it's not. The same could be said for practice burns like these. Not the real thing, but very close to it.
Other than the fact we know it's a reasonably controlled burn, I think it's as close to the real thing as we possibly can get. The adrenaline is still very real, the risk is still very real, and the technique, of course, is textbook technique.
How effective do you think a training like this is going into a house? And
Oh, you can't beat it. You know, it's as close to the real thing as you're ever going to get.
An element of danger, a little bit of excitement. Maybe it's what we'd all like in a job. But more than that, it's the satisfaction of knowing that you can help.
As long as you feel confident in your training, and training is the most important thing, you know, that it's a good feeling to know that you can help people that aren't trained to help themselves. And if you have the right equipment and the right training, you know, it makes your job a lot easier.
Okay, the flames, oh, you can feel the heat now. The flames are completely over our heads. You're starting to spray them. The ceiling are falling down. You can feel the heat. It's gone completely black now. Black smoke everywhere. You can't see a thing.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Music is generally defined as an art of arranging sound to create some combination of form, harmony, melody, and rhythm. Exact definitions of music vary considerably around the world, though it's an aspect of all human societies. Let us return to the archives with curator Montserrat Gonzalez.
The musicians are from 4 different countries: Bolivia, Chile, Colombia, and Canada. The concert was a special feature of an exhibit called Instruments for Our Homelands at the Kitimat Centennial Museum.
Well, I always like music, and seeing that we have such a diverse cultural background in Kitimat, I decided there must be musical instruments in town.
There was no problem at all getting sufficient instruments to put on a display. The Philippines provided a couple of interesting instruments, one of which shows a strong Islamic influence, and the other is from Luzon.
One thing to notice here is here we have steel strings, which will be something that the Islamic people will use, and here we have bamboo strings.
Oh, I didn't see that.
Yes, they are bamboo strings, so they are play.
Oh.
It's not a drum where you strike the body, it's just you play the...
So you would pluck them?
You would pluck them, and as you move these parts here, the sound changes, and then of course it's not... it's played with several musicians will be playing the same instrument.
From the Far East to Europe, and the forerunner of many modern wind instruments.
The interesting thing about the hunting horn that very few people know, and I didn't know until I talked to Anne, is that it is the forerunner, it is the father of all the brass instruments that we have nowadays. It started as a horn, animal horn, whatever it was available in the region, and it was used for hunting. And then slowly they used metal to make the horns. But I still be called horn because it came from an animal horn. And there are interesting stories about the people who play these horns. They were always playing pairs. So you see this beautiful horn, there will be another identical one made. And as you say, they use these straps to hang over the shoulders so they could ride the horses, and they will play the horns when they saw a prey, a fox or whatever they were hunting. Then in about the 17th century, it was introduced in the orchestras. And all the musicians in orchestras, they were expected, this is the court orchestra, they were expected to have another job. So many musicians will teach the children of the nobility, except for the horn players. Because the horn players used to drink too much.
So what has changed?
So what they did, nothing has changed. So what they did, they were stable hands, aside from being horn players.
I guess at this point I should offer apologies to the many sober horn players in the Northwest.
And here we have a trombone. This is an unusual trombone. You don't find it anymore. It's quite long, so it's an old trombone.
So it's quite an antique.
It's quite an antique, yes.
And then we go on to some of the others, the very familiar accordion that we enjoy at Oktoberfest in Kitimat.
In Kitimat, you enjoy this. The French will say, well, this is our instrument. It's not just the Germans. The Russians will say, this is a national instrument. Then you go to Spain, and the Basque will say, no, this is our instrument. So what happens is that the accordion is used everywhere. It's such a popular instrument. The Italians use it. Kitimat, we use it. North America, you find it in bluegrass, too. This particular one is a fairly old one. It's beautiful. Beautifully decorated. It's probably from the late 1920s or early 1930s, and it comes from Italy.
There were several different dulcimers.
This is more of the folk kind of Celtic instrument, dulcimer. Dulcimers are very, very old instruments. Actually, we have not yet found the origin for the dulcimer. We know that they were used back in Persia. And it's used everywhere in the world. The Chinese have dulcimers, the Celts have dulcimers. You know, everywhere you find it. The Slavic people have dulcimers. There are two types of dulcimer. There is the one that you pluck with your hands. You pluck the strings with your fingers, and then there is the hammer dulcimer, which we will be seeing later on.
In Montserrat, we've gone from a very simple dulcimer to what looks like a very complicated one. Perhaps, first of all, you could explain what the word dulcimer means.
The word is, it has derived, it's a corruption of a French word that means sweet music. And it describes the music that can be played in a dulcimer, because a dulcimer is tuned in such a way that you can never, ever play a sour note.
Well, that's a very useful attribute for an instrument to have.
Yes. This one here is beautiful. It was made for the owner, and it was made in Seattle with various woods, and it is a hammered dulcimer. So instead of using the fingers to pluck the strings, one uses the hammers that one can find. One can see 4 hammers here. Each hammer gives a different tone.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
The earliest occurrences of the word imprint include the Australian National Dictionary of 1919, the Bulletin in 1924, and the writings of Herbert Bastow in 1926. There are numerous names for this instrument among the Aboriginal people of Australia. In this final segment of Open Connection, let us return to the archives as Gonzalez shares how the didgeridoo is made.
From dulcimers to didgeridoos, which the Australian Aborigines use in ritual ceremonies.
They use either a bamboo and they hollow it out, but quite frequently what they use is they take a stick of wood, sometimes eucalyptus wood, and they bury it next to an ant hill, which actually they are not ants, they call it an ant hill. What they are termites. And the termites eat away the inside of the stick. And so what you get is a hollow tube.
So all your work is done by the termites.
That's right.
And I was fascinated to learn that in order to play this very simple instrument, you have to have extremely complicated breath control, really.
Yes, because you have to inhale at the same time as you blow the air into the tube. And this particular one is not that long. They are much longer than this. Very difficult instrument to play.
And beside the didgeridoo are these paired sticks, which are beautifully decorated. It's been burnt in, I guess, the decoration.
Yeah, I tell you what they use now, the Aborigines. They use a clothes hanger, a metal one. They open it up and they heat it up, and then they burnt the wood, the surface of the paired sticks. The didgeridoo is always accompanied with the paired sticks.
And simple materials can be made into quite complex devices for making music.
And what we have is a rattle. You will never think it's a rattle, but it is tuned. So each tube of bamboo has a different tone. And then it's playing an orchestra of several of these rattles, and each rattle is tuned differently. So you actually can have a very complex musical program.
With the huge numbers of rhythms that have originated in Africa, no display would be complete without musical instruments from that continent. And what about North American musical traditions?
In the United States, the main origins are Black African and French and British, and yet it's the melting pot of the world. The music has evolved in a way that is typically American. Everybody knows that jazz is American. They can recognize rock and roll as being American. Here we have instruments used in bluegrass, and of course the banjo is typically American. You were mentioning that this kind of instruments such as the spoon, the harmonica, the tambourine, were played perhaps in Sunday school. How about the whiskey jug?
Oh, No,
Was that one of your instruments?
No, that would not have been in evidence at all. Not in my Sunday school.
No, not in mine either.
But we always had the banjo because it's just such a great instrument for kids. Enjoy singing along with the banjo.
Well, you can never play a bad note with banjo.
And there was a corner that would have been familiar in many Canadian homes.
It would be typically Canadian to have a harmonium in the living room, and then the rest of the family or friends would come with other instruments such as the alto harp.
The performers were carrying out a South American tradition.
People play in groups, and they don't mix all the instruments in one group. They usually have a group of people playing this kind of instruments. This is called the zampoñas, okay? And there's another group that play this kind of instruments here. These are called the tarcas.
And like most other peoples, they adapted non-native instruments to their own use.
This is the version of the Spanish guitar. Before...
So when the Spaniards came to South America, they brought their guitars?
The guitar, and the natives of South America made this version of the guitar.
And this is
and they used the armadillo skin, yes. And, but nowadays they don't make this anymore. Armadillo is getting extinct. So they don't allow to make this anymore. So the modern version of the charango is this one here.
It's and you brought this back from
Bolivia, that's right.
And now for a taste of a most enjoyable performance. And for a change of mood,
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection with mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.